Hey, what's up guys? Today I'm going to be updating my Battlefield 6 settings guide. Some stuff has changed since the last video I made almost a year ago at this point. The vast majority of this stuff will be applicable to both console and PC players. I will have timestamps left in the description to help section up the video. I will be going over stuff like the config file and some other PC-specific changes a little bit later in the video. I have the great privilege to be friends with Freethy, who is a well-known PC tweaker, and he did help me figure out some stuff for this video. And of course, I will also link his settings video in the description as well, because he's just a great guy. So if you enjoy the channel, be sure to hit the sub button, hit the like button, and let's start going over all of this stuff. The way this is going to work is I'm just basically going to go through each of these menus one by one until everything is gone through, and then after I go through all of these sections, I'll talk about stuff like the config file, how to get this fancy FPS counter up in your upper left-hand corner of your screen. That's a PC-only thing, and some other PC-specific things. So, starting off with the accessibility menu. This is where you find your menu narration, subtitles. A lot of this stuff is personal preference and down to your needs, so that is in the audio section within accessibility. Then we get into some, I'd say, some essential settings for a lot of people. This is where you find all of your color blindness filters, so you have all of these, and this is also where you can change every single color for basically everything in the game, from primary colors to warning colors. This is where you find your brightness slider. This should also be in the graphics settings, which we will cover later. If you do not want flash grenades to have a blinding white effect, and you would prefer them to have a blinding, or I guess soothing, dark effect, this is where you can turn on flash grenade dark mode. Then an incredibly important menu. Everyone should come in here and copy what I have. They have allowed you to turn down camera shake in the game settings from 50, which that was the lowest previously, all the way down to 25. Highly, highly recommend coming into this menu and turning that down, and then just copying every single thing that I have here. So be sure to turn off all of these motion blur settings, infantry HUD motion, your camera shake all the way down. Be sure to turn on reduce sprint camera bobbing, and then turn off chromatic aberration and infantry crosshair projection. Moving down through the accessibility menu, this is where you find all of your hold/toggle control options. I would highly recommend allowing yourself the luxury of infantry weapon zoom. You can either turn this to toggle or hold. I know some people really prefer toggle on that. This, you can set a specific slide key, whether it's crouch toggle or crouch hold. You can also set your vehicle boost to toggle or hold. I prefer toggle. And for people that want auto sprint, it is a hidden setting in this game. It is under double tap forward to sprint. You have to cycle through these options and you will be able to find auto sprint. Some other cool things in this menu, I would highly recommend setting skip revive to hold. So let's say you're down in a red sec match and you want to give up. That forces you to hold the button rather than toggle the button, which can potentially cause you to accidentally, end your life in the game and all that sort of thing. Your teammates are mad at you. And then when it comes to requesting revives, I would recommend you setting this to toggle, so you don't have to sit there holding the key while you request a revive. Okay, moving through all of these menus here. This is where you find your controller vibration and vibration intensity, all that sort of thing. Text chat options, menu tutorials, and these are all of your hints. If you find an annoying hint is popping up and you don't know how to turn it off, it is accessibility, scroll all the way down. This is where you find an easy to find hint menu. Moving down the line into gameplay settings, this is where you find all of your vertical look inversion settings, another hold/toggle menu. I believe it's the same menu as I just previously showed you. And then this is where you find capture area outline. You may notice while playing multiplayer, there is an area outline surrounding the objective area. And if you don't like that, if it's ruining your immersion or whatever, you can come in here in the gameplay section. It's right at the top under global. You can turn off capture area outline. I would recommend for most new players, in particular, to leave this on. It gives you a better idea of where the objective area actually is. Moving on here, again, more of a hint menu here. Pretty much covers a lot of the same stuff in the other hint menu. This is where you find all of your infantry-specific controls, everything from sensitivity to crouch sprint, parachute auto-deploy. Pretty much everything in this menu is personal preference, and I don't really have many things to suggest to you here. Same thing with vehicles. This is where you find your controller aim assist. In the controller section, ladies and gentlemen, I will recommend you a fantastic video from a fellow YouTuber, which I'm sure many of you will recognize. Okay, HUD. This is arguably the most important menu in this entire settings video. This helps with visibility. This helps with readability. It just helps with the game in general. So first of all, you're going to want to make sure you have your HUD turned on. Then, of course, you want to make sure you have all these HUD motion things turned off because you don't want your HUD elements bouncing around unnecessarily. HUD padding. This setting I get a couple questions about. I personally play with HUD padding set to 100. You can take a look at the right side of your screen to see what this setting does. It essentially squishes all of your UI elements, so your chat window, your minimap, your squad list, and it pushes it towards the center the higher you have this setting set. The reason I play on 100 HUD padding is, if you think about it, the farther squished inward these menus are, the less your eye has to move in order to see a certain element. Now, you don't have to play with this, but I just wanted to explain why I have it set to 100. I do find that it is a little quicker to look at things if you play on this, but some people don't like the look of it. Okay. Overlays, you want these turned on, especially show outlines for friendly targeted soldiers so you don't accidentally start shooting teammates. And then the newly updated soldier visibility filter, you absolutely want to have this turned on. So it is in HUD, and it is in the very first interface and HUD section. SoVis filter, make sure you have that enabled. Going into advanced HUD and icon settings, let's see, is this the... Yes, it is. This is the most important menu, arguably, in the entire settings video. Okay, so let's just start going over things here. So, show kill feed. You want to set this to all. The reason being is I believe by default it's set to squad and nearby. Well, that's fine. Setting it to all can actually give you a little bit more information as to what's happening around the map. Sometimes you can match a weapon sound to a person shooting, and then you can look at the kill feed and see what weapon he has. You know, little tiny intricate details like that. But I would recommend setting this to all. Kill feed icons. So many people ask me, Enders, how do you have your kill feed display the name of the weapon instead of the picture of the weapon? This is the setting that allows you to display the weapon name, okay? You essentially turn off the weapon icon or the weapon picture that appears in the kill feed. It's a bit of a weird way to word this setting, but this is where you find it. Just turn it off. Ping notifications for multiplayer, and then ping notifications other. Honestly, I don't really know what these two do. If you're worried about pings not appearing, definitely come in here and turn them on. These appear in the kill feed, by the way. So let's say someone pings and you say, okay, there's a guy 90 meters away. I think this setting allows you to see it in the kill feed. So kind of personal preference. World log. Okay, so this tells you when you're resupplied. This tells you when you're healed. Honestly, just leave it like this. Simplified squad list. It simplifies your squad list. You know, it gets rid of some UI elements. It squishes things a little thinner. This is where you can change your vehicle HUD colors. And this is where we get into the super important details. All of these menus I'm about to go through impact the visibility and the icons on your UI while you play the game. This is everything from objective icons to enemy icons to friendly and squad icons, okay? So in terms of the first settings here, icons and indicators, icon intensity, and vehicle icon intensity, these are just defaults. I leave them default. If you want them a little more saturated and intense, you can turn this setting up. Okay. For objective icons, because the objectives are very, very obvious, you don't necessarily need them to be the largest ever. So I make them smaller by turning down the scale, and I reduce their default opacity all the way down to 45, because you don't necessarily need to have the flag in your face 24/7, especially when you're shooting, and this is where this setting comes into play. If you aim down sights, you want this set to 0. Reason being is you want your sight to be as clear as possible while you're in gunfights, and you don't really need to see where the flag is during that time. So when you're zoomed in or ADSing, turn this to 0. And then when an objective is occluded, just set it to half of what your default objective icon opacity is. So this will just make the flags a little less visible, and it'll get them out of the way. Same thing for your teammates here. Now, for your friendly icons and squad icons, you have to be careful here, okay? Because you don't want to shoot your teammates by accident. You have to fine-tune these settings to your own personal preference. If you want to try to copy what I have for friendly and squad icons here, you can just, pause the video and make sure these two menus have the exact same settings, so squads don't look, more visible than friendlies and all that sort of weird thing. But it's the same sort of gist. Turn down the scale to make your friendlies smaller. Again, be careful. Turn down the opacity to make your friendlies still visible, but maybe a little bit less visible than they would be. And then same thing, when you're zoomed, make them even less visible. These are friendly revive icons. So as you can see, I just want them, visible, but still out of the way. I turned down the scale to 75. I turned down the default opacity to 60. And when I ADS, I completely remove them from the screen. Again, make sure the friendly icons and squad icons icon menus are the exact same in terms of what you have here for the settings, okay? All right, moving on. Enemy icons. You want to have your enemies be as visible as possible, which means all of these should be at least turned up to 100. You actually have the option to make the enemy spot icon even larger than the default 100. I don't feel the need to do that. If you're absolutely struggling with seeing even the spot icon, I would come in here and turn up the scale, maybe even to, 120, 130. You might have to test that on your own system. Neutral icons. This is stuff like uncaptured flags, unmanned vehicles, unmanned heavy machine guns. Basically, icons that really aren't that important. So I'm actually going to turn the scale down even more. So for stuff like that, you can come in here, you can turn down the scale, you can make it less visible with the opacity, and then I would highly recommend making sure when you aim down sights, this zoomed setting is turned to 0. Ping markers. Okay. For those of you that play RedSec, the ping marker opacity and visibility is probably more important than the ping marker opacity and visibility in multiplayer. So you want to be able to see if your teammates are pinging. This is where you adjust these settings. If you want to make the ping smaller, you can come in here and adjust it less visible. And then finally, when you aim down sights, you can adjust the opacity up or down here. I find this is a nice sweet spot if you guys just want to copy this little section here and test it out for yourself. If you find they're too visible, come in here and adjust ping marker icon opacity, and you can slide it down, okay? All right. And then finally, aim-based icons opacity. Don't touch this. This is total witchcraft. This was added, I believe, late in Battlefield 5, and it's pretty notorious for being very easy to mess up. All right, moving swiftly along, we're still in the HUD section, but just one scroll down below the menu we were just in. Minimap settings, you want your minimap as large as possible. Set it to large. This is where you figure all of your opacities out for the minimap. If you want the background opacity to basically be really, really transparent, you just turn it down, right? Let's see. This is where you decide if you want your minimap to rotate with you. This is where you decide if your minimap zooms into the interiors of buildings whenever you enter them. And this is how you decide the view distance on foot. If you want to see more area on your minimap when you're running around, this is the setting to come in and adjust. If you want to see more of your minimap in a vehicle, this is also the setting to come in here and adjust. Okay, compasses. You want a compass in multiplayer, you can turn it on. I choose to turn it off and only have it enabled for RedSec. Compass opacity, and then you can also decide whether or not it displays spotted enemies. Of course, you should have this on. It's sort of just a no-brainer in my opinion. Who doesn't want free information, Okay, crosshair. They did add a couple new things to crosshairs and hit indicators and all that sort of stuff. This is where you decide your crosshair opacity, custom reticle color. So if you want to change your red dot sight color or just any reticle color, this is where you can come in and change that. Crosshair thickness, infantry crosshair projection. If you have this turned on, I'll just show you what it will do very briefly. So if you see, whenever I'm shooting, see how the crosshair kind of moves, right? That's infantry crosshair projection. So I'll just jump to make it really obvious. See how it's kind of, I don't know, it just moves with you. If you want your crosshair to be completely static, turn off infantry crosshair projection. Okay, now some other big visibility things. The hit markers or the hit indicators are actually a big part of the visibility of this game. You will see if I turn them up to 100 and I demonstrate to you, they're extremely visible, right? They're in the way. So in order to just refine visibility even more, I highly recommend coming in here, HUD, hit indicator, and turning down the opacity of the hit markers themselves. You can also choose the saturation of the hit markers here. In terms of all the colors, this is where you decide all the colors for hits, headshots, kills, and broken armor, and then also broken armor indicators. This is all personal preference. I've had many, many different colors for all of these settings during my time on Battlefield. Another big customization thing that I really, really enjoy is messing around with the hit indicator numbers. So if I just show you again here, you see my hit indicator numbers that show the damage I'm dealing are sort of below my sight, but they're out of the way, right? They're directly below my sight, but still visible. You can move these damage numbers pretty much anywhere on your screen using the horizontal and vertical offsets. You can also adjust the opacity. So, rule of thumb, I would suggest, in general, set this opacity to whatever the opacity your hit markers are. Now, personally, you can see that I prefer to see the damage a little bit more than the hit marker, but general rule, just make sure these two opacity settings for your hit indicators and hit indicator numbers are the same. And then, of course, you can choose the size of this number. I much prefer having it small. I think it's very visible, even when it's small. And then if you want to copy how my hit numbers are, where they're right below your sight like this, copy exactly what I have here for this setting. So hit indicator horizontal offset, set it to 50, so it's right in the center. And then hit indicator vertical offset, you can set it to 90, so it's below your sight. And I'll just show you what this looks like in a scope if you are curious. So we'll just use the SVDM here. Okay. Moving swiftly along with this video, still in the HUD section. I believe we're almost done. This is damage indicators. So when you get shot at, this is the color that appears on your screen. I'm not sure if this is included in colorblind settings. So if there's anyone colorblind watching this video and you can't see the damage indicator of you taking damage, this is where you find that setting. And then lastly, chat visibility, you can set it to show on default, when active on default, or hide on default. And then there's more individual chat settings here, depending on what setting you have selected. Moving on to controller settings. This is where I highly, highly recommend you watch Maxic's video on controller settings. He just put out a new fantastic video going over aim assist, aim input curves, bindings, all sorts of things. I'm sure many of you watch Maxic and his channel. He's been a long-time Battlefield YouTuber, and I do really believe that video he made is fantastic for you controller players. Moving on to mouse and keyboard settings. There really isn't much to talk about here. This is a lot of personal preference stuff. Make sure you have mouse raw input on. And if you're struggling with finding any sort of sensitivity, you should know that it does actually tell you your sensitivity measured in inches and centimeters based on what DPI. So for instance, this is how you read this for people that are not aware of how you read this. I play on 1600 DPI and I play on 6.5 in-game, which means I have a 360 distance, the distance I have to move my mouse to do a 360 turn in game, of 16.5 inches or 42 centimeters, okay? That is how you read this menu. So if you're using 800 DPI, this would be the sense. If you're using 3200 DPI, that would be the sensitivity. Okay, moving on to graphics settings. This is where, again, a lot of this is personal preference. What do you want on your game? Do you want performance? Do you want fidelity? Do you want the best looking game possible? Kind of have to make that decision. However, I'm always going to recommend to turn everything to low because that is how the game feels the best. The higher the FPS, the lower the latency, the better the game feels, even if you can't see the FPS based on your monitor or whatever situation it may be. Optionally, you can come in here and turn textures to overkill or ultra if you just want your game to look a little bit better. You can do the same thing with texture filtering. You can come in here and turn it on to high, something like that, but it will have a slight impact on your FPS. Another thing that I may suggest to you is if you're struggling with hearing footsteps, you can turn high fidelity objects amounts to ultra. Reason being is if you read the description, set inventory and vehicle visual quality in relation to the highest fidelity animations, sounds, and effects. So if you're paranoid and you really, really want to make sure that everything is set up correctly to hear the best audio cues, come into graphics and turn high fidelity objects amount to ultra. I personally just play with it on low. I think the developers kind of... It's in the developer's hands to fix the audio, you know what I mean? Okay. As far as I'm aware, the sharpness slider is actually bugged in this game. I've heard that mentioned many, many times, so yeah, that kind of sucks. Going into advanced options here, this is where we get into some more technical stuff, I guess. Okay, according to Freethy, who is a fantastic game optimizer and a good friend of mine, he did some testing, and enabled plus boost is currently what you should have this set to for NVIDIA Reflex low latency. If you hate jagged edges in your game, and you don't like that, you don't like how my game looks, this is where you find anti-aliasing. You can either choose between TAA and DLAA. Then, of course, you can choose which model you're using. I believe DLSS and DLAA 4.5 are newly added to the game, which is great. In terms of upscaling technique, of course, NVIDIA cards have DLSS. You can choose between quality 4.0 and 4.5, FSR, XeSS. Again, this is all system dependent. Okay, frame generation. This is interesting. So, according once again to Freethy, he did some testing. If you have a very high base frame rate, I'll just go in the test range and show you, right? Say you have a very high base frame rate, minus 300. You can turn on frame gen and set it to 2x, and apparently, for most systems, the increase in latency is only going to be about 1.5 milliseconds, okay? That's an increase in latency, so yes, your game is going to feel less responsive. However, you're going to max out your monitor's, refresh rate and all that sort of shit. So this is pretty much only for the top end systems. If you're playing in 4K, all that sort of stuff. For 99.9% of people, make sure you have frame generation turned off, okay? And for performance overlay, this is the FPS counter in the upper left-hand corner, but it will not look like mine, and I will go over how to make your FPS counter look like mine later in the video. I will have it timestamped, okay? Moving along, camera settings, this is field of view, personal preference, same thing with your weapon FOV, motion blur, make sure to turn all this shit off, and definitely make sure to turn off vignette, horrible setting, it sort of it blacks out the edges of your screen, it's just not a great time. And this is where you make sure you have VSync turned off on your display. Your refresh rate is set correctly, resolution, whether or not you're playing in full screen. Freethy mentioned to me that this game is a little bit buggy with full screen borderless. So if you absolutely 100% want to just make sure that everything's going to feel smooth and there's going to be no bugginess, play on full screen, even though it's kind of annoying to Alt-Tab. Moving along to the audio section. The audio of this game has been addressed about 1 billion times. If you don't want any of the music or any of the Commander VO or any of that stuff, you can just come in here and turn all that off. For sound effects, I would actually recommend turning these down. The UI is incredibly loud in this game. This is where you can turn your hit indicators on and off. And then there's so much talk about what sound system do you use? What audio mix do you use? In my personal experience in testing, I prefer 3D headphones and default mix. The other thing that I thought was good was 3D headphones and night mode, okay? So if you have not tried 3D headphones and night mode, or 3D headphones and default mix, this is what I would recommend currently for Battlefield 6 and the current audio state of the game. This is where you find all of your tinnitus settings. This is also where you find your voice chat. Proximity chat is being added to the game, I believe, this year. So a lot of you will probably want to turn this on. If it isn't, it's in audio, and you just scroll down, enable voice chat. And then also music radios. If you want music in the in-game world, this is where you can turn it on. Moving on to system, this is where you enable the developer console. This simply allows you to access console commands the developers allow you to use. For instance, I'm just going to turn off the FPS counter with an in-game console command for you guys, and I will turn it back on just to show you some of the things you can do with it. You can change a lot of things. There are a lot of different console commands here, as you can see. Basically, if you're more of an advanced user and you understand this stuff, this is where you access the command console. If you're a streamer and streamer mode and anonymous mode are important to you, it's found in system under here. If you want to see your stats on third-party websites, this is where you turn on gameplay data sharing. If you want to see your ping on the scoreboard to see your connection, this is where you find that setting to turn it on. And then, of course, network graph. This is where you find very complicated in-game menus and data showing, damage logs, hit registration, a bunch of different performance parameters and telemetry and all that sort of stuff. Time nudge, server latency, tick rate. This is more for the very, very, very technically interested types of people. And that is basically it for the in-game settings. Now we're going to jump into some more PC-specific, sweatier settings like config files, FPS counter, Nvidia settings, all that sort of stuff. All right, starting off the PC-specific portion of this video, a lot of people ask me what my Nvidia Control Panel settings are. Basically, I just copied whatever Freethy did. I believe Freethy might have set this up on my PC himself. So I'll just scroll through these here. You guys can maybe try these out. Obviously, it's going to be very, very system dependent. I have a 4090 to 9800 X3D. So results may vary for this menu. Maybe for some of you, just don't worry about this. All right, let's talk about the config file. But before we talk about that, we have to understand where to put the config file. In order to understand that, you have to find out where your game is installed. So I play on Steam. For me, it is my PC, storage, games, Steam, Steam apps, common, and then Battlefield 6. And you basically just have to see this little BF6 EXE here. Okay, and you can see the config file all the way at the bottom. Let's open it up. There's been a lot of confusion as to what the config file actually is. I've seen hilarious conversations on the websites you're probably thinking of, saying this is some sort of secret cheater file. No, dude, no. You remember when I told you to turn on the developer console in the in-game settings? All the config file does is makes it so you don't have to type in these commands that the developers allow you to use consciously every single time you start the game. The config file does everything for you automatically, so it turns on the FPS counter for you automatically. It makes sure the position of the FPS counter is where you want it automatically, okay? Okay, so let's start going over some of these things. This is the Freethy config file, okay? So I give Freethy full credit for basically just coming up with this, even though a lot of the stuff was used before. So what this does, perfoverlay.drawfps1, this turns on the FPS counter automatically. Perfoverlay.drawgpu 0, this gets rid of the GPU FPS reading on the FPS counter because the GPU FPS is not the FPS you want to pay attention to. It's the CPU number that is your actual FPS. FPS display format, and then your X and Y offsets and display scale. So display scale is how big the FPS counter is. If you want it bigger, type a larger number. And then your X and Y offsets, this is how you get the position of the FPS counter set up on your screen. And then you can see the included resolutions here. So if you're on 4K, you want to put 3645 in your X offset. If you're on 1440p and you want it in the upper left-hand corner, like I have it, you want your Y offset to be -50, and you want your X offset to be 2365. And then, of course, if you're in 1080p, so on and so forth, 1725 in the X offset, all that sort of stuff. Some things to understand here. worldrender.lightTileCSPathEnable0 no longer works, unfortunately. This was a massive FPS increase. It no longer works, so that really, really sucks. And then worldrender.motionblurenable0, DOF method, and DrawSim and pixel throughput. These are just things that probably don't work at all, but it doesn't hurt to have them in the config file in case they do actually do something. So depth of field method would just be like weapon depth of field, motion blur, just make sure motion blur is basically off, which you can already disable it in the game anyway. So that's the config file. And honestly, guys, it doesn't really fucking do anything. It's basically an FPS counter. That's what this is. So if you want a fancy FPS counter, this is what you do. And then in terms of making a config file, guys, it's the simplest shit ever. You go to new, you go to text document, and then you fucking like go over here, you go to rename, and then you just go boom, .cfg. There it is. You made a CFG file. That's literally all you have to do. Another small performance thing that actually does matter a little bit for Battlefield 6 is making sure resizable bar is enabled. For whatever reason, some of the newer Nvidia drivers disables resizable bar for Battlefield 6. So in order to turn it on, you need Nvidia Profile Inspector. You can just download this thing. It's a well-known, official Nvidia thing. And all you have to do is you're just going to edit this driver profile. This is completely allowed. It's not anything weird, so don't worry about that. You just have to go Battlefield 6, click that, and then in this little secondary search bar, you can just type rbar, and then you can see this will say disabled for a lot of you. All you have to do is come in here and just set it to enabled, and then hit apply changes, and that will make sure that resizable bar is enabled. Another small thing I wanted to mention is actually the Windows setting, hardware accelerated GPU scheduling. So basically, if you just type that into Windows in your search bar in the bottom left, you'll find like graphics, and then you'll see advanced graphics, and it's under that. It's basically just referred to as HAGS. Personally, for my setup, being a content creator and all that sort of stuff, I have to play with HAGS on, otherwise my stream lags. This setting, however, for a lot of you, might actually gain you about 10 to 30 FPS, depending on what you're doing. You have to test this yourself. So if you really, really want to test performance, you're going to have to go into some sort of consistent, repeatable scenario where you can benchmark the FPS with hardware accelerated GPU scheduling on versus off, and you just have to test the FPS. So that might gain you a little frames. All right, that is basically everything I can think of for this settings video. I hope you guys found this informative. If you did, be sure to hit the sub button, hit the like button, check out the second channel where I'm regularly posting content, and make sure to swing by the streams. I stream every single day at twitch.tv/enders. Going to be having some pretty cool RedSec tournaments coming up here, especially the Elite Series whenever they announce that. $1 million tournament with the boys, money on the line. So be sure to follow the streams. I also stream on YouTube if you're unaware of that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next video.